So it's time for some seed sowing. It's February and I'm slowly easing into it. Now the really important thing you need to know is the health of the seedlings that you grow has a direct impact on the crops that you harvest later on. So you need to really pamper them. You need to make sure that they're stress-free, well cared for, don't become root bound, and give you the best opportunities for not only productive harvest but also really tasty harvest. So here are the 9 steps to master the simple yet crucial art of sowing seeds in modules. The first step to successful seedlings is to do a location check. So firstly, it's going to be undercover because it's so early in the year. I'm here in the solar tunnel. I've got 2 mini greenhouses with shelving. That's where I like to start most of my seedlings. But don't worry, if you don't have an undercover place like this, if you have a sunny south-facing windowsill, that is going to work just as well. The only difference is when you do sow things, you'll need to rotate them twice a day just to avoid all the seedlings growing and bending towards the light. The other thing that's vital with seedlings is you need to be close to a water source. So if you have a hose or perhaps a water butt nearby that you can fill a watering can, then that's going to save you a lot of effort. So if you haven't got something like this set up yet, definitely prioritize that before sowing any seeds. The final thing you want to do is to make sure that you have a clear, clutter-free work area to start your seed sowing. Now this was full of stuff earlier this morning. We've put that all out of the way, so it is a nice clear surface to start it, because you need to think and approach it like a kitchen. You don't want to start cooking when your kitchen's full of washing up. It's very depressing, and the same thing translates to in your garden. So spend a bit of time getting your potting bench ready, set up, to start sowing those seeds with a clear conscience. The second step is to think carefully about the timing of what crop you're going to be sowing. Of course, there are going to be things that need to get started early, that might be tender but need a bit of protection. We'll go into that later on in this video. But right now, it is February and there's not really much to sow. So the important thing is just to gradually ease in to the season and carefully consider what you are going to be sowing, just to make sure that you don't have seedlings sitting in pots for too long. Because one thing I like to do is actually be more patient, because I don't like it when my seedlings are sitting around for extra time, more than needed, where they suddenly start becoming root bound and start stressing, and that's going to have a knock-on impact on the quality of the harvest later on. I'd much rather wait a few more weeks before I feel confident sowing something. So the key consideration here is definitely timing. The next stage is to consider the module sizes for sowing your seeds. So you can get ones, these are around 30 millimeters in diameter. I find these actually too small. There's only a very small handful of things that I will start in this. Usually it's a bit of cosmos and then quickly plant it out. My go-to favorite is this size. I get this from Containerwise. These are the 40Ls, so I've just given them a rough measure. They're around 42 millimeters in diameter, and I find these to be the perfect size, because what I like to do is I like to grow on a seedling a little bit so it has around 4 to 5 true leaves before transplanting, and this gives the root space to do it. Whereas with this, I'm usually planting it out when it's very small. And when you have small seedlings, they're far more susceptible to things like frost damage, even if they're tender, and also slug damage. I like to just grow them a little bit on inside before planting them out. So almost everything is started in these, apart from dwarf beans, where very often I'll start these off in around 7 centimeter pots. And then you have these, the deep cell. This is amazing for things like broad beans or fava beans, because they have a deep taproot that sends it straight down into the bottom, whereas if you're growing them in these, they wouldn't have the root space. So basically for broad beans and runner beans, these deep cell trays are my absolute go-to, and they work a dream, and they're nice and sturdy as well, so I can just pick it up with one hand, pick another one in the other hand, and head to the planting location. This next step is all about simplicity, and very often I see this way overcomplicated, and it's about the compost that you use when you sow seeds. In fact, I've seen some quite passionate discussions, perhaps that's the best way to call them, online about what compost to use when you're sowing seeds. I like to ignore all of that and stick to what I know works year on year, and I haven't changed this for the last, 10 years. And it's just using organic, peat-free, multi-purpose compost. You might want to buy 2 or 3 different brands just to try them out and find the best one that works for you. It also saves me a lot of money because things like seed compost cost a lot of money. I don't have time to start mixing my own seed compost mixes. I just like to get into the garden and get seeds into the compost as soon as possible. Once you've got your chosen compost, it's now about filling the tray. So I like to put it fairly close against the compost here and just bring it in like that. So you can see how quickly, I cover it so I can't see it. That's how quick it is. And then you kind of press it down, level it off at the top using that excess compost. Push it out like that, finish it off. Now that is nice. I like to have it fairly firm just so it means you don't want to have really, really light fluffy compost, because when you're taking out the module with all of the roots, very often the compost will just fall apart into nothing, and that does a lot of damage because you really want to transplant seedlings as carefully as possible. So by pushing down like this and making sure that there is, a nice amount of compost in there, it's going to be nice and firm for the roots, but again, not too firm where they won't grow. Now this isn't actually ready for sowing yet. What I like to do is to give it a good water, and the most effective and also lazy way of doing it is filling an empty tray with around 2 to 3 centimeters or 1 inch of water and sitting this in and leaving it for a few minutes, and it's going to soak up all of the moisture. This has been soaking for around 3 or 4 minutes, and it's brought up all the moisture. And what that actually does is, firstly, it ensures consistent moisture throughout. You don't want dry pockets. The other thing that it does is it makes it much easier when it comes to making holes. So what I usually do is I'll just go through using my fingers like this, keeping it really simple. Now, one of the most important things you've got to understand is that if you plant a seed 1 centimetre deep, 2 centimetres deep, maybe even 3 centimetres deep, it doesn't really care how deep it is, because in nature seeds aren't planted perfectly. They sometimes sprout on the ground and they'll still grow into a tree. So don't worry too much about depth, but of course you want to aim for an approximate. So there's going to be a chart right here that shows you the approximate depth for all of the different crops, so you get a good understanding of what to do. So I've got my seeds here. I'm sowing some radish. And radish is something that I always like to multi-sow. Multi-sow is a very popular method of sowing seeds now, mainly because you massively increase the amount of crops you can grow and start off in a small area. Now, it was actually made popular on quite a few commercial growing operations, and then Charles Dowding has really very much brought it into popularity. And there's a chart here that I've used that's my adaptation of multi-sowing with the amount of seeds I like to put into a module depending on the crop type. But again, I don't spend ages counting out every single seed. I just use it as an approximation. So all I do is I got my seeds, and then I just go through like a pinch of salt until roughly 4, 5 or 6 fall into each hole. And then I just do the whole tray in one go. The seeds have been sown, and then I put over a layer of compost. I've patted it down gently, and then the final thing I did was just give a quick water over the top, because we remember earlier we've already soaked the base, just so there's a nice even balance of water throughout. Now the next stage is, firstly, write a seed label, because it's so important. You might think that you remember, and I still do this all the time. I never learn. But do write a seed label just so you know, especially the variety and the time of year that you planted it, so you can use it to help build up a knowledge of what varieties work well. And so write a label, and you actually just place that on the top. You don't place it in. The reason why is because of this cardboard. I've got some good solid cardboard here, and what I'm going to actually do is use this as an insulation layer. So one of the worst things to happen to seeds when you've planted them is for the growing medium that they're in, the compost that they're sown in, the worst thing to happen is for that to dry out, because that can really damage germination rates. So the easiest, the lazy way of working around that, rather than always coming up and making sure it's watered, is getting a bit of cardboard over the top, and then you just simply put 2 stones either side, and that stops any evaporation, which makes it so easy for you. And now all I'm going to do is place this on the wire shelving, and the reason why is because wire allows air to come underneath, which will naturally root prune the seedlings, leading to a healthier plant and a better root mass when you then transplant it outside. Something many gardeners can experience, and I experienced this last week, is the joys of having pests such as mice, voles and birds. They particularly seem to be interested in the legumes that you plant, for example, peas and beans. In fact, I've had some voles run ravage with my recent peas and broad bean sowings, which you can see the destruction. So there's a few things you can do, but one of the best things you can do is, as high up on your shelving as possible, put your peas and beans, because they're most susceptible, and also think about how you can make little kind of net enclosures or be a little bit creative to protect them and stop things coming in. The next step is to look at protection. Now, you might only be growing hardy plants for the time being, but even if they do get frosted, it can knock them back a little bit. And again, you want to pamper them because you want to get the best results as possible later in the season. So there's a few different options in terms of frost protection. One is like a mini greenhouse like this. I've put the doors down, so that effectively creates an extra air pocket. Another thing you can do is, as a natural alternative, is you can use a couple of layers of hessian over whatever the structure is. Just drape it over in the same way that this covering is draping over that. You can use sticks to create a proper little structure. This works really well. Another thing you can do is you can get something like some cardboard, and also, top tip, keep all your frost protection right next to your seedlings, so you don't have to go into your garden shed or whatever. You need to keep it as easy as possible. Keep them where they're needed, so at a moment's notice you can take action. So this is actually a bit of an experiment. You can either use a whole cardboard box and put it in, or you can slot this. I'm just going to lift this up. You can put this cardboard box into there, slot it in, and then I've got this wool left over from wool packaging, which I can then cover over the top like that to create a little insulated room. So really there's so many options to do it, and all of these options are completely free, just using waste materials that can also go on the compost pile. The last step in the simple art of sowing seeds in modules is about knowing what's coming next. You've got seedlings to look after, and then you'll also have seedlings to transplant, and both are equally as important as sowing the seeds. So in this video here, I show you how to look after seedlings, and then this video here is a no-nonsense guide to transplanting to get the best results, and I really hope these help.